Hi there, my name is Shannon Broughton with Colorado Christian University, and today I'd like to talk to you about the themes throughout the Old Testament and how they weave throughout all of the Old Testament and even through the Bible. So when it comes to reading the Bible, and particularly in the Old Testament, it is important to be able to identify the themes that are laid out for us. By identifying the themes, you first want to discover why they are important, and then you can see how does it fit into the Old Testament, or rather the whole Bible. So the two most interesting themes to me was the covenants and God's holiness. So let's begin with the covenants. The covenants are the most important themes in the Bible, are one of the most important themes in the Bible, because it acts as the skeleton to which the entire redemptive story is built upon. So most people don't understand what a covenant is. So a covenant is a partnership that two people have, or a group of people have, usually just two people, the same goal in mind, and they work towards that goal. So let's see, for Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve in the garden, right? The third chapter, they eat the fruit. God comes and finds them, and he lays out their consequences with the promise. The promise was that there would be an offspring of the woman, and that it would crush the serpent's head. So there would be an offspring that would redeem the entire mankind, which would be Jesus. Then we get to Noah, the covenant with Noah. This covenant was interesting to me. God makes a promise to Noah that he will not destroy the earth again with water. And he makes this promise knowing that humans are evil from childbirth in Genesis 8:21. So one thing I've noticed, God did not ask Noah to do anything. God still promises to be faithful to us, even though we as humans cannot fulfill our promises. So that brings us to Abraham. So of course, humans are still messing up. We're still not obeying God. So God decides to take one man and partner with him to create a covenant that would benefit all mankind. So God promises Abraham that he will be the father of many nations. He asks Abraham to leave his land and to trust him. That's in Genesis 12:1-3. So we get to the Mosaic Covenant, which is the covenant to Israelites. And that's through Exodus through Deuteronomy. So even though Abraham's family at this point, there is a large nation of Israelites. And he's made a great nation, but they're all in slavery in Egypt. And through the Mosaic Covenant, God rescues Israel from slavery in Egypt and promises them to be his treasured possession and a holy set apart nation. So all Israelites had to do was obey God's commandments and follow God's law. And yet they still had a hard time doing that. So we get to David's covenant with God. And God had already set David on the throne of over Israel. So he's the king of Israel. And now God is promising him that he will be a great name, that a descendant of David would be the one that God would establish his kingdom through. Can we guess who that one would be? Yes. That's Jesus. Jesus is the one that will be the descendant of David, through David, the line of David, that will be the one that will establish God's kingdom. God promised a new covenant. So this is in Jeremiah 31:31. It says, "The day is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel." So God, through the prophets, is showing us the hope that is to come in the new covenant that will be. The new covenant. So in Matthew and Luke, we see that Jesus is sitting down with his disciples, breaking bread and drinking the wine. And it says that he took the cup and he said, "This is the cup, the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." Luke 22:20. So we see the covenant fulfill itself and build to the point of where Jesus is the new covenant that all of Israel is waiting for. So let's begin with God's holiness. So God's holiness is a defining character of God. It is unique and utterly all-powerful, radiating out from God like energy. As awesome as God's holiness is and how it can also be very dangerous when getting too close. This makes me think of the sun. This is a great metaphor to think of the sun, how big it is and how radiant it is. But although if we get too close, it could be very dangerous. We think of how the sun radiates and illuminates the light and brings darkness to light. And that's essentially God's holiness. So let's look at Moses in Exodus 2. We see the burning bush. So Moses sees this bush and he's curious. He wants to get closer. He wants to know what's going on. And as he gets closer, God's like, no, wait. And Moses is like, I'm here, what? And God says, you're too close. I don't want you to get any closer. It's dangerous. And God asks, he says, take your shoes off, take your sandals off. You're on holy ground. So God's presence is too powerful, and God knows that. And then later on in Exodus, we see how God led the Israelites in the pillar of clouds. In Exodus 13, 17 through 20, there's a cloud that they follow until they get to the Red Sea, and and God is in this cloud. It wasn't until they saw the Egyptian army behind them that God actually moved from the front of them and moved behind to keep them safe, to keep them separated. And there was always sun on the side of the Israelites, and it was dark on the side of the Egyptians. And again, it's just like God's holiness shining the light. We also see in Leviticus 16, 1 through 25, how God's presence was in the tent of meeting, and how you could not go in that tent of meeting being unclean, unceremonial clean. They had work to do. They had to sacrifice animals. It took a lot of work for them to come to the Lord and be in his presence. It's not like it is today where we can just pray and ask God to come and be with us. We then see in Isaiah his vision that he has. This is incredible. He has a vision of God's holiness. And he first recognizes, he notices that he's like, wait a minute, I'm very unclean. I cannot be in your presence right now. And then he says, then this serpent flew to him with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. So he was holding this coal, not by his hands, but by tongs, because it was so hot. And he takes it to Isaiah. And he says, with it, he touched my mouth and said, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. And that's Isaiah 6, 7. Isaiah 6, 6 through 7. So does this imagery remind you of something? So instead of we have to get clean first, and then we can go into God's presence. Now, in Isaiah's vision, you see him being very unclean and being in the presence of God. And he says, and this coal is given to him, and he's made clean. He's made pure. That reminds me of our Savior, what we talked about in the new covenant. This is Jesus. Jesus is that burning coal from Isaiah 6. He's the coal that is going to save all of mankind. We see in 2 Corinthians 7:1, therefore, since we have these promises, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates bodies and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God. So when we read the Bible, and especially in the Old Testament, it is important to be able to identify these themes, because they are what leads up to what the Bible is and how God talks to us and interprets things. In my next video, I'd like to discuss how these themes that I chose through the Old Testament weaves through the storyline of the Old Testament. But until next time, thank you. Have a great day.